Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're doing something, well, a little bit different. We're going on a visual gallery walk to explore the real faces of anxiety. We're not just going to talk about it as some dry clinical term you'd find in a psychology textbook. No, we're looking at it as a profound physical and environmental experience. Because the truth is, anxiety literally shapes our faces, our postures, and exactly how we interact with the world around us. So let's dive right into this visual taxonomy.
Just take a look at 15-year-old Minka here. She's hanging completely upside down from the rafters of this rustic shed. You've got that faded blue caravan in the background, and her face is inverted. She's smiling, but you can see she's visibly tense. This image perfectly captures the absolute vertigo of adolescent anxiety. It's such a brilliant spatial metaphor, right? It really visualizes that state where your foundational stability has just literally been pulled right out from under your feet. You're basically living in this precarious, high-wire balancing act.
Which brings us to Section 1, the high wire of anxiety.
To really understand why we experience this sudden, objectless dread, what Truman Capote famously called the mean reds, we actually have to look inside our own brains. Deep in there sits the amygdala. Think of it as an almond-shaped emotional computer. Whenever it detects a threat, it immediately triggers what's called a low-road response. It's a quick and dirty survival mechanism, and it's completely designed to save your life first and ask questions later. It gets your heart racing way before your logical, conscious brain can even register what the problem actually is.
As the renowned neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux points out, when it comes to detecting and responding to danger, the brain just hasn't changed much. In fact, he says that in some ways, we are basically just emotional lizards. Our ancestors survived because of this hyper-vigilant fight-or-flight response. I mean, without it, we wouldn't have had the fear needed to avoid predators, and we'd probably be extinct. So if you ever felt your heart absolutely pounding over, say, an overflowing email inbox, yeah, that is your prehistoric brain at work. It's still hardwired for prehistoric threats.
Moving on to Section 2, somatic trauma and hypervigilance.
Now, when people face severe prolonged trauma, like institutional abuse, their nervous system is essentially permanently rewired. This creates a lifelong template of defensive alertness that we call somatic vigilance. It's literally the physical embodiment of chronic anxiety. See, the threat might be way in the past, but the body? The body doesn't know that. It remains this rigid, defensive fortress, completely unable to drop its guard because safety was once violently stripped away.
You can really see this physical toll in these project notes documenting survivors of exploitation. The descriptions are intense. Wide piercing eyes, deep facial lines, incredibly rigid postures. We see one survivor standing in a dark doorway, bracing himself, revealing extensive physical tissue scarring. And then there's former jockey Ron Lockett, staring right into the lens with these hypervigilant eyes. These are the visceral, lingering echoes of institutional fear. It's the long-term cognitive architecture of a mind that has literally been under siege.
Next up, Section 3, systemic ostracization and exhaustion.
The clinical backdrop for this next theme is what we call social ostracization. When someone faces ongoing systemic hostility, it creates this profound, heavy weariness. We can see this internalized anxiety so vividly in the moody, shadowed portrait of Indigenous advocate Adam Goodes. The heavy anxiety born from constantly facing a hostile public eventually forces a necessary protective withdrawal. Sometimes you simply have to step back from the collective swarm of society just to protect your own psychological architecture.
And this intense social vertigo, this constant state of self-focus and feeling heavily scrutinized, is actually a surprisingly universal aspect of public life. The beloved actor and writer Michael Palin warmly notes that anxiety doesn't ever really go away. As much as we might wish for it, there is no mythical sunlit plateau where you're just never anxious about anything ever again. Instead, it just shapeshifts. It constantly morphs to fit our current environments and whatever new challenges we're facing.
Let's explore that environment piece in Section 4, environmental displacement and dread. During sudden, chaotic displacements, like having to flee a natural disaster, anxiety reveals a fascinating, though scary characteristic. It is highly contagious. We call this intergenerational contagion. It's basically the vicarious acquisition of fear. When a family is evacuated, panic completely bypasses logic. Young children intuitively absorb the stoic dread of their parents, sensing a shared, collective threat to their survival. You don't even need to say a word. That fear transfers instantly through the environment and body language.
Just look at Joe Cymbalista here, sitting in murky, stagnant floodwater, right inside a domestic living space. Look at his rigid, frozen posture, surrounded by submerged furniture. This image perfectly reflects cognitive dislocation and just profound shock. It's the absolute destruction of the domestic sanctuary. It perfectly illustrates that terrifying acute anxiety that strikes when the outside natural world violently invades our safe spaces.
And here we see the aftermath through the eyes of youth. This is 21-year-old Willow, standing dead center in the hollowed-out skeleton of her flood-destroyed home. The walls are literally stripped bare down to the raw studs. Her hollow, numbed expression illustrates what we call acute structural betrayal. I mean, imagine the profound disorientation of having the foundational structures of your early adulthood violently gutted, leaving you standing exposed inside the wreckage of your own future.
This brings us to Section 5, Existential Erasure and Solitude.
Now we're looking at the anxiety of obsolescence. Meet Phil McAdam. He is the very last commercial fisherman at Port Phillip Bay. Standing there at the helm of his vessel, staring forward into that cool, gray maritime light, Phil carries a heavy, existential dread. It's the psychological burden of being the last of his kind. He is carrying the impending death of a traditional way of life entirely on his own shoulders, in total, solitary endurance.
Phil's isolation connects directly to the psychological trap of chronic worry. So, ask yourself, which rule do you follow? Researchers have found that non-worriers typically use the feel like continuing rule. They simply stop when a task feels boring or unproductive. But what if you're a chronic worrier? Well, you probably fall into the as many as can trap. You feel like you absolutely must continue worrying until every possible disaster has been considered and averted. The task you've set for yourself is safety, and because absolute safety is completely impossible, the worrying just never stops.
Finally, Section 6, Living with the Mean Reds. As we wrap up our gallery walk today, having seen anxiety etched into faces by trauma, environment, and existential dread, we really have to reevaluate how we live with this complex machinery. Ultimately, anxiety is just our mind trying to navigate a future it cannot fully control. So if these visceral mean reds are simply the necessary price of having a forward-thinking mind, maybe it's time we stop fighting our own biology. Can you learn to look in the mirror and see an overeager guardian rather than a broken enemy? Think about that. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.